I want you to picture a montage of the last 10 years of news. Just a chaotic, rapid-fire slideshow of all the global headlines that have made us all feel, I don't know, a little crazy. You've got Britain tearing itself away from the European Union, this massive stable bloc just fracturing.
Yeah.
You've got China literally dredging up sand from the ocean floor to build military bases on fake islands in the South China Sea.
Creating land where there was no land and territory where there was no territory.
Exactly. Then you have the U.S. signing the Paris Climate Agreement, then ripping it up, then pasting it back together again. You've got these multinational corporations suing actual national governments because an environmental law, hurt their quarterly profits.
It sounds like a headache. It sounds like the world is glitching.
It feels like random geopolitical noise. But the source material we are diving into today argues that if you squint, there is a hidden thread tying every single one of those headlines together.
It's a bold claim, but I think it holds up. The argument here is that none of those events are really about trade or the weather or, sandbars.
Right.
At their core, they are all distinct battles in a single massive war over political authority. Who has the right to rule? And more importantly, who decides that that rule is legitimate?
Today we are doing a deep dive into a text titled The Global Organization of Political Authority. And look, I'm going to be honest with you and with our listeners. That title sounds like something you'd find collecting dust in the university basement.
It does sound dry, I'll give you that. But think of it as like the source code. This text is trying to give us the X-ray vision to look past the daily news cycle and see the actual architecture of the world.
Okay.
Specifically, it wants to explain why the world is organized into these things we call sovereign states.
Which is something we just take for granted. We look at a map, we see the lines, the colors, and we just think, well, obviously that's how the world works.
We assume it's the only way to do things, but the source makes a compelling case that the state, this idea of a bordered country, is actually incredibly weird if you look at the long arc of history. And this is the part that actually unsettled me a bit. It suggests that this system might be crumbling right under our feet.
So let's start with the water we swim in, the big concept, sovereignty.
Right. If you stop a random person on the street and ask them to describe how the world works, they'll probably draw you a map. They'll say, here is France, here is Germany, the government in Paris runs France, the government in Berlin runs Germany. That right there is the principle of sovereignty.
It's the idea that a state has supreme authority within its own borders and recognizes no higher authority outside of them, which to me still feels completely natural. Like, isn't that just physics? Gravity makes things fall and borders make countries.
And that feeling of naturalness is exactly what this source wants to shatter. That structure is a human invention, and a relatively recent one. Those headlines we mentioned. Brexit, the South China Sea, those aren't just disagreements. They are stress fractures. They are moments where the tectonic plates of what sovereignty actually means are grinding against each other.
Okay, but before we get to the fractures, we need to understand the machine itself. The source spends a lot of time talking about institutions. And I have to be honest, when I see the word institution in a geopolitical text, my eyes kind of glaze over. I picture a dusty building in Brussels filled with bureaucrats.
And that is the biggest mistake people make in international relations. We have to separate institutions from organizations. If you get this wrong, you misunderstand how the world works.
Okay, make that distinction for us.
Yeah.
Because they sound like synonyms.
They aren't. Think of it this way. The United Nations, the building in New York, the security guards, the interpreters, the letterhead, that is an organization. It has a physical address. But the UN Charter, the set of rules and norms that countries agree to live by, that is the institution.
So the organization is the hardware. The institution is the software.
Precisely. Or think about marriage. Marriage is an institution. It's a set of social rules, expectations, legal bindings. A wedding planning company, that's an organization. You can have the institution without the organization.
The source uses diplomacy as an example of this, right?
Yes, and it's a great example. Diplomacy is a massive institution. It's a set of agreed-upon habits. I won't kill your messenger if you don't kill mine. We will talk before we shoot.
Right.
That evolved from Italian city-states in the 14th century. There was no world embassy headquarters. There was no building, just a shared understanding of the rules of the game.
I get that rules exist, but here is where I have to play devil's advocate, because I know there are listeners screaming at their speakers right now. There's this whole school of thought called realism, right? And a realist would look at this and say, who cares about the rules?
The might makes right argument.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The world is a jungle. The only thing that matters is who has the nukes and the GDP. If you're a superpower, you do what you want. The institution is just, I don't know, window dressing for the weak. Putin doesn't care about a piece of paper.
That is the classic realist critique. And it feels emotionally satisfying because it sounds tough. But our source pushes back on that really hard, and the counterargument is fascinating. If the world were purely about material power, just guns and money, then weak states shouldn't exist.
To just be conquerors.
They would be snacks. They would be eaten by predator states constantly. Look at a country like Luxembourg. It's tiny. It sits right next to Germany and France, historically very aggressive, massive powers.
Yeah.
In a pure survival of the fittest world, Luxembourg doesn't make it to the 21st century. It gets absorbed.
But it's still there.
It is. Why? Because of the institution of sovereignty.
Yeah.
There is a cardinal international norm, a shared belief that says, you are a state, therefore you have a right to exist, regardless of how many tanks you have.
So the software is actually protecting them from the hardware.
Exactly. The rules actually restrain the guns. Now, the source breaks these institutions down into a sort of layer cake of authority, which I found really helpful for visualizing how deep this goes.
I'm always up for a food metaphor. Break down the layer cake.
Okay. At the bottom, the crust, the foundation, you have what they call constitutional institutions. These are the deep existential rules. This layer answers the question, who is even allowed to play the game?
And in our current world, the answer is sovereign states.
Correct. Not corporations, not religions, not tribes, states. Then you have the middle layer, fundamental institutions. This is, how do these players interact? That's things like international law and diplomacy.
And the frosting, the top layer.
The top layer is what we see most often in the news. Issue-specific institutions. These are regimes built to handle specific day-to-day problems. The Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, the World Trade Organization, even the Global Postal Service.
Wait, hold on. The Postal Service, that's a geopolitical institution.
Absolutely. Think about the miracle of it. You take a piece of paper, you write a name on it, you put a sticky square on the corner, and you drop it in a box in New York. A few days later, it arrives at a specific apartment in Tokyo.
When you put it that way, it is kind of magic.
It requires a massive, intricate institutional agreement between sovereign states to honor each other's stamps, handle each other's mail, and trust each other's systems. It's an institution working in the background that we are completely blind to because it works so well.
That's wild. We don't even think about it.
No.
But this constitutional layer, the bottom crust, the idea that the world is made of states, that's the part the source says is actually a constructed reality.
It's a story we tell ourselves. And the best way to see that is to look at the maps. The source walks us through 3 specific maps from history to show how much authority has changed. And I think this visual journey is the strongest part of the text.
Let's walk through them. Map number 1. Contemporary Europe, the map we all have in our heads.
Right. Picture a standard classroom map. You see France, Germany, Poland, clean lines. Each country is a different color. Where France ends, Germany begins. There is no gray area.
It looks permanent. It looks like it's always been that way, and always will be.
But it's a deception. The source points out that many of the borders in Eastern Europe, for example, were only formally recognized in 1975 with the Helsinki Accords. Many of the states on that map are younger than our parents.
And the key legal fiction here is equality.
Theoretically, yes. In the eyes of the institution of sovereignty, Luxembourg is equal to Germany. They are both sovereign. They both get 1 vote at the UN General Assembly. It creates a legal flatness to the world.
Okay, so that's the world we know. Clean lines, theoretical equality. Now let's jump back. Map number 2. The world in 1900.
Very different picture. You don't see hundreds of tidy little states. You see massive, undifferentiated blobs. You see the British Empire covering a quarter of the globe. You see the Russian Empire, the Ottoman Empire, the Qing dynasty in China.
So no equality here.
None. The world was a hierarchy. The imperial powers acted like sovereign states when they dealt with each other. Britain would send an ambassador to France, but within their empires, they ruled over millions of subject peoples who had absolutely no rights.
And the key thing the source mentions here, which is kind of shocking to modern ears, is that back in 1900, this wasn't seen as evil by the people running it.
It was considered legitimate. That's the crucial word. In 1900, empire was the accepted way to organize political authority. It wasn't seen as a crime. It was seen as civilization. The constitution of the world at that time said, it is okay for big powers to own little ones.
So we went from hierarchical blobs to clean, equal lines. But let's go back even further. Map number 3, the medieval Mediterranean, around 1200 AD. the Catalan map.
This is my favorite one. If you look at this map, there are no borders, no territorial lines at all.
So how do you know who rules what?
You don't. The map focuses on coastlines, trade routes, and cities. And instead of colored shapes for countries, you have pictures of kings sitting on thrones and armies sitting in tents.
What does that tell us about authority?
It tells us that authority was personal, not territorial. We call this system heteronomy.
Heteronomy. That's a $5 word. Break it down for us.
It basically means multiple centers of authority. Let's make it concrete. Imagine you are a peasant in France in the year 1200. You don't just answer to the government. You answer to a local lord who owns the land you farm.
Okay.
But you also answer to a distant king who demands soldiers for a war. And simultaneously, you answer to the Pope in Rome, who has his own courts, his own taxes, and his own laws.
And those authorities overlapped.
Constantly, and they conflicted. The Pope could tell you one thing, the king another, and your local duke a third thing. There was no clear sovereignty. Jurisdiction was a mess. It was a web of loyalties, not a grid of borders.
So if I committed a crime, it wasn't clear whose court I would go to.
Exactly. It depended on who you were, where you were, and who had the stronger army nearby.
So the clean lines we have today, they're actually the exception in history. We spent most of human history in the blobs or the webs.
Exactly. The sovereign state is a very recent anomaly.
This raises a huge question for me. How do we move from one map to the next? Is it just about who wins the wars? Did we switch to the state map just because the empires blew each other up in World War II?
Wars play a part, certainly. But the source makes a really sophisticated distinction here, citing the scholar Robert Gilpin. We have to distinguish between systemic change and systems change.
Okay, those sound like the exact same thing. Help me out.
Think of it like a poker game. Systemic change is change within the game. It's about who has the most chips.
Okay, so in geopolitics, that's who is the superpower.
Right. Moving from a world with many great powers before World War I to a bipolar world with just the U.S. and the Soviet Union to a unipolar world with just the U.S. The players change, the balance of cash shifts, but the rules of the game poker stay the same. That is systemic change.
Got it. New boss, same rules.
Exactly. But systems change. That is a fundamental shift in the type of game being played. That's like sweeping the poker chips off the table and deciding to play football instead.
That's the shift from the empire map to the sovereign state map.
Yes, it's a total rewrite of the rulebook. And the source asks a critical question. Why did empires vanish so fast? Why did we switch games so quickly in the 20th century?
I always assumed it was because Europe was broke. They destroyed themselves in World War II and couldn't afford colonies anymore.
That's the material explanation, and it's true. But the source argues it wasn't just weakness, it was a moral bankruptcy of empire. The idea of empire lost its legitimacy.
People just stopped believing in it.
They stopped accepting it as right. Self-determination replaced empire as the only moral way to organize the world. And the stats back this up. Between 1946 and 1975, 76 new sovereign states were created.
76 states in 30 years. That is an explosion.
It was a revolution. We decided collectively that the only legitimate way to be a political entity was to be a sovereign state. We updated the constitutional institution of the world.
But here is where it gets really interesting and complicated. We have this system of sovereign states now. Everyone is supreme in their own house. Everyone is equal. But we also have thousands of treaties telling them what to do. Isn't that a contradiction?
That is the paradox of modern sovereignty. And the source argues it's the defining tension of our time.
Explain the paradox. Because if I'm sovereign, I shouldn't have to listen to anyone.
Ideally, yes. But you are a sovereign state that exists on a crowded planet. You have problems that don't respect your borders. You want to trade with other countries. You need rules. You want to stop the oceans from dying. You need rules. You want to track a virus jumping across borders. You need rules.
So to solve problems, you have to give up some of that supremacy.
We call it unbundling authority. Think of your sovereignty like a bundle of sticks. To get things done, you have to hand out sticks. To navigate the world's oceans peacefully, states had to agree to the law of the sea. They had to agree that they don't have absolute authority over every patch of water. They voluntarily tie their hands.
And the source has some crazy data on this explosion of rules, right?
It's staggering. Between 1648 and 1814, so nearly 200 years of early sovereignty European states signed 127 multilateral treaties.
127. In 2 centuries.
Since 1945, there were tens of thousands.
Wow, so we are drowning in rules.
We are seeing a massive proliferation of these issue-specific institutions because the reality is sovereign states cannot solve global problems alone. They're forced to tie their own hands with thousands of little ropes just to function.
It feels like Gulliver's Travels. The state is being tied down by thousands of tiny threads.
That's a perfect image for it. And this brings us back to the start. If we look at the big picture, we started with the medieval mess, heteronomy, overlapping circles of power. Then we went to the empire blobs, big, hierarchical, unequal. And now we are in the era of the sovereign state. Clean lines, but connected by tens of thousands of invisible wires.
That's the summary. But so what here is crucial? Why does this source want us to understand this? Is it just a history lesson?
No, it's a warning, or maybe a forecast. The source wants you to realize that sovereignty isn't magic. It isn't biology. It's a shared belief. It's an institution we created to solve a specific set of problems.
And if it's something we created,
we can uncreate it, or it can evolve into something else.
That brings us back to the montage at the beginning. The lawsuits, the climate accords, the confusing wars.
Right. Think about the closing thought the source leaves us with. We are seeing a massive rise in transnational issues, things like climate change or global financial flows that make borders look silly. A carbon molecule doesn't stop at the French border.
And a digital virus doesn't check in at customs.
Exactly. And we are seeing non-state actors, huge corporations, terrorist networks, NGOs that are starting to wield power that used to belong only to states.
I mean, some tech companies have a GDP bigger than most countries on that map. They can ban a world leader from their platforms. That feels like authority.
It is authority. So the question is, what kind of change are we in right now?
Are we just in a period of systemic change?
Maybe. Maybe the U.S. is declining and China is rising, and the boss of the poker game is changing. That's the standard story most analysts tell.
But the source hints at something bitter.
It asks, are we on the verge of another systems change? Is the map about to dissolve again? If states can't solve the climate crisis and they can't control the global economy, maybe we are drifting back toward a modern form of heteronomy.
A return to the medieval map.
In a digital sense, yes. A world where authority is overlapping, messy, and shared. Where you answer to your local government for trash collection, but you answer to a global climate body for your energy use, and you answer to a digital corporation for your speech rights.
A world where the clean lines don't matter as much as the networks that cross them. That is honestly kind of terrifying. It sounds chaotic.
It is a provocative thought. We assume the state is forever, but history tells us nothing is forever. The empire game ended. The feudal game ended. There is no guarantee the state game goes on for another century.
That is a lot to chew on. Next time I look at a map, I don't think I'm going to see it quite the same way. I'm going to see the cracks.
That's the goal.
Thanks for diving deep with us. We'll see you on the next one.